Hello everyone and welcome to BattleTech Faction Briefings. Since it is the spooky time of year, I chose a mercenary unit that has spooky theming. Plus, the White Witches have almost no history, so I didn't have that many choices. Today, we are looking at one of the oldest mercenary commands in all of BattleTech, the Grave Walkers. The Grave Walkers have an emblem that represents their name well, a skull on a tombstone. While they are yet another skull-themed mercenary unit, they stand apart from other units due to their simple but effective color scheme. The Grave Walkers have a simple color scheme of forest green with sea green highlights. A simple design that provides a unique look and some green camo flavor without using a simple splintered camo design. While they do have a long history, the Grave Walkers are lacking in actual organized lore. If you want to skip spoilers, then go to the time listed. It is unknown when the Grave Walkers were established. It is known that they predate the Star League and even the development of the battle mech. From the Age of War onward, the Grave Walkers have worked for all 5 of the Great Houses, and many of the Terran Alliance early era proto-states. While they are long-lived, they never earned great renown, despite earning a great reputation due to their skills. They adapted and evolved over the centuries, but for some reason their history is obscured. It is claimed that even the members of the Grave Walkers do not know the details of their history. It is known that they started working for the Lyran Commonwealth in 2864, and continued to serve them for 150 years, before their common history would be recorded. By 3025, the Grave Walkers were stationed on Bon Normand, or possibly Bon Normand if it's actually French, where they worked as a garrison force for the Lyran Commonwealth. They had 2 regiments with combat vehicles and infantry support. They continued to do garrison work, with each regiment serving where needed. They did not serve in any major battles during the later part of the Third Succession War. The 2nd Regiment of the Grave Walkers was sent by the LCAF to garrison Apollo to defend the world from pirate attacks. This would become the main base of the 2nd Regiment for decades. When the Draconis Combine counterattacked the Lyrans, both regiments of the Grave Walkers were pushed back to Tamar. There, they faced off with the 13th Rosselhog Regulars. Duke Kelswa took command and planned to send the unit to charge forward to their own deaths. But Colonel Merwin knocked out the Duke and put the Duke's cronies into jail before taking command. The Grave Walkers pushed forward and won the battle, offering terms of surrender, but the regulars kept fighting until the unit was completely destroyed. Afterward, the Duke arrested Colonel Merwin, with plans to execute him for treason. However, Lyran High Command convinced the Duke, who lacked military experience, to let the colonel go. With reluctance, he sent the Grave Walkers on their way. The first Walkers took up a contract with BioHarvest Inc. in 3031. BioHarvest was a company that was established due to information gained from the Helm Memory Core. They moved back to Bon Normand, where they did training during their time as a garrison force. Secretly, they were sent there to test out new satellite systems for the Federated Commonwealth. Meanwhile, the 2nd would return to Apollo, where they continued to protect the world. Despite being stationed on Bon Normand, the 1st Grave Walkers were called out to join Task Force Blizzard, alongside Snords Irregulars and Camachos Caballeros. They were teamed up with Task Force Snow, made up of the 3rd Lyran Guards and 3rd Davian Guards. The teams worked together during the invasion of Vega. The mercenary team captured the spaceport and easily destroyed the infantry and armor that were stationed there. The Grave Walkers and Caballeros were able to protect the spaceport as the 5th Amphibian Light Assault Group did probing attacks to take the spaceport back. Snords Irregulars were sent to hunt down the raiders. The AFFC units would fight the 14th Legion of Vega and not have as much success as the mercenary forces. After the 5th Amphibian were dealt with, the mercenaries joined up with the House forces in the siege of the capital. This caused the 14th Legion of Vega to retreat from the world. The counterattack would come about a month later, as the 14th Legion of Vega returned with the 2nd Dairon Regulars. The FedCom forces got overwhelmed due to bad command decisions. The Grave Walkers came in to assist, but struggled against the DCMS forces. After a month of dealing with bad leadership, the Walkers abandoned the world to save their unit. Blame was aimed at the Gravewalkers for the failure of the operation, but the Mercenary Review Board would clear them of any wrongdoing. When the war was over, the first would return to Bon Nermont and the second would remain on Apollo. In March 3050, the Falcon regulars arrived to take Bon Nermont. The advanced satellites were able to warn the Gravewalkers of the arrival of the Jade Falcons. The Gravewalkers would do an all-out attack on the Falcons, as the Falcons did their assault drop. The Walkers dealt heavy damage to the invasion force. However, the Falcons were able to regroup and call in reinforcements. The Falcons took out the planetary defenders, and the local forces fled into the wilderness, where they would stage guerrilla attacks for years. The Gravewalkers, on the other hand, chose to escape in hopes of finding allies to fight against this new enemy. The second Gravewalkers were on Apollo and faced off with the Turkina Kashyyyk and Gamma Galaxy of Clan Jade Falcon. The Falcons came in hard, as Apollo was the capital of the former Rim World Republic. The second used local fortifications that were built by Stefan Amaris centuries earlier to hold out against the powerful foe. A team of elementals used old maps to sneak into the forts and deal damage. The Gravewalkers learned from the fall of the first fort and prevented another secret entry. The Falcons changed their strategy and used Arrow 4 bombardment to shatter the Walker defense. When the artillery had ripped open enough holes in the walls, the Falcon mechs and elementals rushed in, and shortly after that, the second Gravewalkers surrendered to the Jade Falcons. This would be the end of the second Gravewalkers. The survivors of the 1st Regiment fled to Black Earth, where they met up with the 17th Sky Rangers. In May 3050, the Falcons' Delta Galaxy would attack. The Rangers would get crushed at the spaceport. The first used burning oil to stall the Falcon advance. It was a futile gesture, and the Falcons took the planet within 30 hours. The Gravewalkers would flee once again. By the end of the fighting, the Gravewalkers would be reduced to less than a single battalion with armor support assets. They would be stationed on Kukin's Pleasure Pit by 3054, as they attempted to rebuild at a stable base. The stress of rebuilding and the horrors of the clan invasion would cause their commander to retire in 3057. The new commander, Aru Kira, would also deal with the heavy stress of rebuilding the shattered unit. By 3062, the Walkers had rebuilt with salvage and taking on any applicant they could. They picked up soldiers who had served with the Waco Rangers, 12th Star Guards, and Wilson's Hussars. However, they only built up to a single regiment of questionable quality, despite adding a few clan mechs to their number. The Gravewalkers would face off with Clan Jade Falcon again in 3064. They would serve in the Ark Royal Defense Cordon and would battle on Kukin's Pleasure Pit. They would face the Turkina Kashyyyk and 3rd Falcon Swoop Cluster, led by Khan Martha Pride. The Walkers lost a battalion in only an hour of fighting. The Gravewalkers would survive for 2 weeks, but at great cost. Colonel Kira did a trial of possession and won the right to receive Hejira from Star Captain Daniel. The team was allowed to leave and retreated to Pasig, then to Babeski. After taking such great damage, the Gravewalkers once again had to rebuild. They were down to 12 mech warriors and 8 battle mechs, with a few support vehicles and mine-laying equipment. Things would go badly for the Gravewalkers as they attempted to rebuild. Their failures would ruin the reputation of the unit, and the new commander, Lieutenant Colonel Tevdit, would start drinking heavily to deal with his PTSD. To make matters worse, several technicians and some of the mech warriors would leave the unit to join other mercenary forces. In 3068, the Gravewalkers would sign a deal with Blackstone Battle Mechs Limited to raid a Falcon base on the world of Sudeten. The unit refused the mission and dismissed Tevdit. The only remaining ranking officer was Captain Robert Prather of the Armor Forces, who would become the new commander of what remained of the Gravewalkers. Prather would then petition to have his forces join the Kellhounds, but they were rejected because of the amount of other shattered units seeking to join the Hounds. However, they were given a new contract to join the Ark Royal Defense Forces. He accepted the offer, and the team was given the opportunity to start over. The early stages of the Word of Blake War also included a new incursion by Clan Jade Falcon. Leader of the Kellhounds, Daniel Allard, died and his XO took command. The Gravewalkers were transferred from a defense team to a training cadre for all the new recruits the Kellhounds had to deal with in order to replace their lost soldiers. The best of the recruits would join the Kellhounds, but the lesser soldiers would stay as part of the Gravewalkers. While assisting with combat training, the Gravewalkers would expand into 2 combined arms battalions. Sadly, many of the veterans who joined the Gravewalkers would have major issues with PTSD, making them unpredictable as soldiers, but they would become very good teachers. The Gravewalkers had rebuilt enough reputation that the Lyran Alliance would hire them to train new LAAF soldiers in 3071. The only major mission for the Gravewalkers during the Word of Blake War was the liberation of Tharkod. They would be reserve forces and would be brought in near the end of the battle to fight the lowbrow mercenaries. They helped take out the traitor mercenaries and would prevent their survivors from escaping. They continued to assist in the war and continued to build up their reputation once again. By 3079, the Gravewalkers were in talks to officially become part of the Kellhounds. At this point, they were about the same size as the Hounds, with only 1 battalion of veterans stationed on Ark Royal. By 3085, the Gravewalkers would be merged with the Kellhounds. They would become the replacement 2nd Battalion of the unit. They would serve with the Kellhounds for decades before they were once again destroyed. The Gravewalkers are an odd bunch. They are long-lived, but the wars of the late 31st century tore them into pieces. They would become part of the Kellhounds, but even then, that unit would get wiped out in the later part of the Dark Age. Perhaps their biggest impact was as teachers, which is sad to say when they survived through so much over the centuries. The only pilots that receive notation are from the 31st century, and with limited information. Dennis Merwin, the commander during the later years of the Third Succession War, up until the early clan invasion. He would help boost the reputation of the unit, but would be killed by Clan Jade Falcon in 3050. Jason Merwin, the younger brother of Dennis. He was in command of the 2nd Regiment in the Third Succession War era, and took command of the whole of the unit after his brother died. He would try to hold the unit together, and retired in 3057. Aru Kira. She took over when Jason retired and tried to rebuild the Walkers. She would suffer from high stress, having many nervous breakdowns. She would die in 3065 due to unlisted causes. However, it is likely she took her own life due to the trauma she experienced on the battlefield. Goran Tevdit. He took over after Kira's death. He wasn't much of a leader and suffered from alcoholism due to his battle fatigue. He would be removed from command in 3068 due to his failures as a leader. Robert Prather, an armor commander during the mid-31st century. He took over the unit in 68 at the rank of captain. He would slowly rebuild the unit and earn his rank along the way. He would rebuild the unit into a training cadre. He would be the last Gravewalker commander, as he was able to make a deal with the Kellhounds, and the Gravewalkers became the 2nd Kellhound Battalion around 3085. Lenore Stali, leader of the 3rd Company, 2nd Battalion of the 1st Regiment. She held off enemy counterattacks on Vega, which allowed her allies to escape. She pilots an awesome. The mech deployment of the Gravewalkers is made up of a large variety of tech. Most of the time, they are stuck with middle-of-the-road or outdated gear. However, they do get some clan tech during their fights with the Jade Falcons. The 1st Regiment and 2nd Regiment both have unique formations for their battalions. The 1st Regiment's 1st Battalion used fast mechs, 2nd only used energy weapons, and the 3rd used a direct fire team made up of heavy and assault mechs. They are considered a heavyweight unit, and the battalions support each other with their interesting builds. The 2nd Regiment did things differently, with each 1st Company of each battalion using heavy and assault mechs with long-range firepower, which would also include the Command Lance. The 2nd Companies have medium and fast heavy mechs designed for flanking. The 3rd Companies, made up of light and medium mechs with integrated fast hover tanks designed as a recon and quick strike team. Despite similar builds, each battalion worked independently from the other battalions. Over the course of the years, they would use less vehicle support as they tended to not replace them very often. However, they did use a mix of long-range and concentrated firepower options for their vehicles. They would also use Thunder LRMs, a specialized missile that became a minefield after deployment. Their usage of minefields in order to trap enemies remained, even after the majority of their armor was destroyed. Their tactics and gear options do make them very different than many other mercenary units. Their use of minefields and flanking maneuvers make them a threat to their enemies. Except clanners. For some reason, they can't seem to do squat against clanners. There is no fiction that I could find about the Gravewalkers. Despite their long history, they have very little information about their early exploits. The majority of the source books do fill out important information of the 31st century, but there are many books that are just made up of location and composition information. I chose to cover the Gravewalkers on a whim, because when I saw the name, I thought, hey, that's kind of Halloween themed. I figured they were a generic mercenary unit that was created in the Third Succession War and died in the Word of Blake War, like many others. I'm glad I was wrong, but the large gaps in their early history make it seem like there was a plan to do something bigger with the unit. As far as I know, those plans never came about. Thus, the big hole in their history will just remain a big hole in their history, which is rather unfortunate because I feel like the Gravewalkers deserve better than what they got. Overall, they're a very strange unit that is generally underrated. Painting up a set isn't a bad idea for those who have interest in running some early Succession Wars battles. They would provide an alternative to the Iridani Light Horse and Blue Star Irregulars. It might even be a nice companion unit for those who like the Kellhounds. Frankly, I'm not going to paint up a set, despite the fact that I do love their color scheme. If you have painted up a set, let me know in the comments. Next time, I'll be going to the Draconis Combine to discuss the 5th Sword of Light and their expansion unit, Sorensen's Sabers. Look forward to a very samurai November. If you have any suggestions, let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching, and a big thank you to my 900 plus subscribers. May your weapons stay hot, and your reactors stay cool. Look forward to the next BattleTech faction briefing, and until then, I'll see you at the tavern.